"Don't make me dance anymore. I beg you, Dad," the little girl whispered, tears spilling down as she stood in her sparkling white dress. And right there in the Grand Ritz Hotel's center stage, where single millionaire Dean Marshall was struggling to save face before 100 esteemed guests, his daughter shrank back in terror, as if the stage were a monster. But in that very moment, a young waitress stepped forward, knelt down, and held the little girl tightly in her arms, leaving Dean speechless. Who had given her permission? And then, why did his daughter cling to her in return? All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a story that will leave you amazed. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people joining us from all around the world. The year's largest charity gala took place at the Four Seasons Hotel by Lake Travis, the atmosphere orchestrated to perfection down to every breath. Champagne flowed like rivers, couture gowns barely skimmed the velvet carpet, and compliments drifted through the air like the elite's own private ballet. This was where Austin's wealthiest did more than merely appear. They made themselves seen. Yet amid that dazzling fervor, at a table tucked beside a side corridor, there was an uncanny stillness. Graham Wexler, the real estate magnate whom the entire city feared at the negotiating table, sat motionless, staring at his daughter as if she were a door whose lock he had forever lost the key to. Ellie, 10 years old in a white dress and silver shoes, looked like a lone blossom in a forest of glass. Her hair was swept into an elegant bun, a few stray strands brushing her neck. Every detail had been perfected for her performance tonight, but her small face seemed on the verge of shattering. Her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles turned white, her eyes fixed downward, and her heart as though it were trying to escape her body. That evening, Ellie was supposed to join her classmates for a dance routine she'd practiced for weeks. It had once been her joy, the only place in their cavernous estate where laughter still echoed for father and daughter. Before the accident, before the one woman who had made them both feel safe vanished in a crash in a storm of rain. Since that day, Graham had tried everything to mend the unfixable, scheduling therapy sessions, buying tickets to every major amusement park, even asking a Broadway director if he could arrange private dance lessons for his daughter. But Ellie responded only with silence. No resistance, no anger, simply retreat. When the music struck up, signaling the start of the performance, the children sprang onto the stage, faces alight with excitement. Every eye in the room snapped toward the center. Every spotlight sought out their cuteness. Yet on the chair beside Graham, Ellie remained as still as a statue. She hunched forward, fingers white-knuckled, shoulders quivering in time with the music, as if her body itself were rebelling against her. Graham leaned in, attempting words of comfort, but as he took in her trembling face and sealed lips, trying to stifle the sobs, his throat tightened. The man who had conquered the South's most complex real estate deals now found himself powerless to lift his daughter to her feet. A few tables away, a young server was clearing a tray of glassware. No one paid her any mind. Just as always, her brown hair tied back, simple black shirt, nothing about her appearance stood out. But her gaze was different. Tessa Moreno had once known that very same fear, deep within herself. She did not know who the father and daughter were, but in that moment, the look in Ellie's eyes, Graham's helpless hand resting on his thigh, and a silence no one dared name, all compelled her to act. No plan, no hesitation, only one step forward. Tessa left her station and glided through the festive tumult as though she belonged nowhere, yet needed no one's permission to be there. She paused beside Ellie's chair and knelt. No intrusion, no loud words, no drawing attention. Just a whisper-light presence, and a single sentence unspoken, felt rather than heard. Graham started as if to intervene, but it was too late. Ellie lifted her head, her eyes meeting those of the stranger. 1 second, then 2. And suddenly, she leaned in, pressing her face against Tessa's shoulder, and hugged her tightly. No sobs, no explanation, just an embrace. In that silence, it became the loudest sound of the night.
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
The gala evening passed like any other lavish event in Austin, mentioned in a few social columns, a few hundred photos posted with glossy hashtags. But for Graham, that night was unlike any before. Not because of the fundraising totals, nor who attended, but because of one moment, fleeting and silent, that imprinted upon him something he hadn't felt in a year: hope. He couldn't forget the image of Ellie leaning into that stranger's arms, as if her entire being had finally found a safe place to breathe. A single hug, a simple, unconditional, purposeless embrace, and the daughter he thought had shut herself off from the world opened again. The next morning, Graham skipped his early meetings and returned to the hotel instead. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, only that he couldn't let last night's occurrence slip away as a random phenomenon. The hotel manager, at first awkward, then upon Graham's description, her figure, name tag, and area of service, confirmed her name was Tessa Moreno. She worked the night shift, spoke little, and never caused any trouble. And there was one more detail. She had a 6-year-old son named Micah. A few hours later, Graham found Tessa at a small cafe tucked beside the old factory district in East Austin, where time seemed to slow between weathered walls and the steady hum of the espresso machine. She sat alone in a corner, hands wrapped around a pale cup of coffee, her fatigue quietly visible. He entered, not too abruptly, but enough that she looked up immediately, her gaze wary. She offered neither greeting nor smile. Her hazel eyes met his as if awaiting something: an accusation, a reprimand, or an unnecessary thank you. Graham pulled out a chair and sat across from her. No bodyguards, no tie, just a father still bewildered by his own emotions. He made no mention of titles or wealth. He simply said, "I don't know what you did, but my daughter needed it." Tessa did not reply at once. Her fingers tightened around the cup. Part of her remained on guard. Too many times had kindness been met with misunderstanding. But as Graham continued about how Ellie had withdrawn all year, about his desperate attempts at everything except pausing to listen, the defensiveness in her eyes gradually softened. He did not beg. He did not coerce. He offered a straightforward, unexpected invitation. "I'd like you to spend some time with me, not as a tutor, not as an expert, just as a friend she can trust." Tessa remained silent. She gazed out the window at the trees swaying in the early summer heat. Everything about Graham felt foreign: his manner of speaking, the world he inhabited. Even the faint scent of cologne on his shirt carried an unfamiliar weight. She didn't belong to that world. Yet Ellie's voice echoed in her mind, the little question asked last night: "Can you stay a little longer?" That question was not a demand. It was a small crack in the solitary wall the girl had built around herself. And among all things, Tessa understood the ache of no one staying behind. She turned back to Graham, and for the first time since they met, her expression softened. She nodded slowly, not because she trusted him, but because she trusted the way Ellie had gripped her trembling that night. It was a small nod, barely noticeable. But in Graham's mind, it was a gentle ripple, like the surface of Lake Travis stirring under the rare breeze of a seemingly motionless summer. Every Saturday afternoon, the house on Barton Creek Hill would come alive with unfamiliar sounds: the patter of little feet rushing about, the snap of candy jars opening, and the soft giggles echoing from the kitchen into the living room. At first, Tessa would arrive on the dot and leave just as promptly. She brought coloring books, a few of Micah's old toys, and always left her shoes on the doorstep, as if she feared leaving any trace in a world that wasn't hers. But over time, Ellie began to linger in their conversations. First, it was about the kittens in a comic strip, then about the secret drawings stashed in her closet, One day she quietly showed Tessa an unfinished sketch. A girl standing alone on a stage, her hair blown back, but with no face. Well, I couldn't draw the eyes yet, Ellie whispered. Tessa didn't ask why. She simply nodded and handed Ellie a softer pencil. Micah, Tessa's son, also started appearing at these meetings. The little boy, with his tangled curls and a laugh that seemed untouched by sorrow, would make Ellie laugh in return. And when she did, that laughter sounded like something fragile being rescued. Graham watched it all from behind the window frame. He never intruded, though sometimes he'd step up to the cookie baking station, an area he clearly didn't belong. His hands, once confident signing multi-million-dollar deals, fumbled with the scoop as he measured dough. Ellie used to regard him like a stone statue in the dining room. But now, each time he dropped flour or furrowed his brow at the oven's controls, she looked at him with the kind of forgiveness he had never imagined. Afternoon tea rituals gradually formed. They didn't drink anything elaborate, sometimes just warm water with a slice of lemon, slightly burnt cookies, and some hastily washed strawberries. Yet in that simplicity, Ellie began to listen. Tessa didn't lecture. She shared gently, piece by piece, about her years in foster care, the people who passed through her life and then left, the suitcase that never fully opened. She spoke of her 9th birthday, when one lonely candle stood atop a dry slice of bread, and of the day she vowed her son would never feel unchosen. Ellie didn't ask many questions, but each time the story ended, she would sit a little closer. One afternoon, after Micah had dozed off on the couch, Ellie paused while arranging old ballet slippers. She lifted a pair of worn pink shoes, fingertips tracing the frayed edges. Her gaze was distant, not sad. "Miss Tessa," she said in a voice as soft as a breeze, "would it be okay if I never dance again?" Tessa didn't answer right away. She knelt and gently retied the ribbons, as if stitching together something that had come undone. Then, with the same steady tone she used in her stories, she said, "As long as you don't forget why you loved it." Those words fell into the room like a pebble dropped into a still pond, silent, yet sending ripples outward. Ellie didn't reply, only nodded slightly. But that afternoon, she slipped on the pink ballet slippers and took a few tentative steps across the rug. No spins, no leaps, just feeling. It was the first time she'd worn them since her mother's passing. Graham stood at the end of the hallway. He said nothing. He didn't step in, but his hand clenched, not from worry, but from an emotion both new and familiar. Hope. And in the space between the cooling cup of tea and the faint music humming from the old speaker, something was being healed. Not by advice, not by therapy, but simply by presence. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a drink, then stay tuned for the surprising turns ahead. Comment 1 if you're enjoying this story so we know you're still here. The city never sleeps when there's a new rumor, especially when it involves someone like Graham Wexler. Businessman, millionaire, a familiar face on business magazine covers and the red carpet gala circuit. This time, it wasn't about a real estate project or a billion-dollar deal. It was about a hug in the park. Just a short video, under 15 seconds. Someone secretly filmed from afar, Ellie sitting and drawing beneath a tree, Micah playing tag, and Tessa next to Graham, both of them laughing gently, naturally, unaware they were being recorded. The clip spread like wildfire. 1 million views overnight, 3 million within 2 days. As usual, the online community was split. Half called them Austin's most adorable modern family. The other half dug for dirt. They found Tessa's old account, scrutinized every photo, every comment, every vague detail. Once a waitress, has a child of her own, father unknown. The top-liked comment read, "Just another Cinderella story." Tessa said nothing for the first 3 days. She quietly went to work, picked up Micah, then hid away in her tiny apartment as though lowering her head far enough would make the storm outside pass her by. Then a letter slipped under her door. No sender's name. Inside was a copy of a custody lawsuit. The sender was Luis, the man who vanished from her life 6 years ago with no explanation, no financial support, no birthday message. Now he was back, claiming he wanted to make amends, that his son needed a father, that the media worried him about Micah's current living situation. Tessa held the paper, her hands steady, but her heart cold. Everything she feared most, prying eyes, judgments about her past, the return of the person who hurt her worst, now surrounded her all at once. For a moment, she wanted to vanish from Graham's world, from Ellie's, from even that fragile sense of belonging she had only just dared to grasp. That evening, she went to see Graham when Ellie and Micah were asleep on the sofa after an afternoon of pillow fort building. The room was silent, lit by a soft yellow glow. No witnesses, just two adults, one who once believed she was strong enough to need no one, and the other who once believed he was unworthy of being asked to stay. She did not cry. She spoke slowly, each word cutting like shears. "I don't belong in your world." Graham did not interrupt. He looked at her as if memorizing every line, her eyes avoiding his, her shoulders drawing inward. She had told him that growing up in foster care, the worst pain wasn't being unchosen, but thinking you were chosen, then being left behind. She inhaled deeply, as if standing on the brink. "I'm just a woman full of scars. People will never stop talking about them." Silence stretched. Graham stepped closer, respecting space, not rushing. He brought no promises. He said nothing of lawyers or plans. He answered in a low voice, enough to touch the softest part of her. "It's because of those scars that Ellie trusts you. And so do I." Tessa did not reply, but tears brimmed in her eyes, not from weakness, but because in her life, few had ever refused to turn away from those scars. That night, she did not leave, nor did she promise to stay. She simply sat beside Micah and Ellie, who slept soundly, looking so peaceful as if they had never known the noisy world outside. And in that silence, a decision began to take shape, not through reason, but through a mother's instinct. The rain came down on the very day of the hearing. Austin is usually scorching in June, but that morning the sky was leaden gray, as if foretelling doom. The rain didn't pour, it just drizzled, enough to soak pant cuffs, enough to weigh heavily on Tessa's mind. She stood before the courthouse gates, shrinking in her thin, worn coat. Each step down the rain-slick hall felt like walking back into a past she'd fought to forget. Judged, suspected, forced to prove herself worthy of the child she had raised with every ounce of faith she had left. Luis sat a few rows away, his face cold and empty, as though the years he'd abandoned his son had never happened. He looked at no one, yet his indifference tightened a knot in Tessa's chest, for he hadn't returned for Micah. He'd returned for something worse, the right to take him away. Tessa had no lawyer, no family support. She steeled herself to stand alone once more, until a woman from the clerk's office approached, gently spoke her name, and handed her a neatly organized packet. She didn't understand at first, but when she saw the first note, Micah's name carefully listed under grounds for custody, she knew who had arranged it. Graham had never mentioned this. He made no grand promises, no loud interventions. But every document in that file, every photograph, every testament that she was the only one who had never left Micah, bore the mark of a man who chose to trust rather than control. The hearing moved faster than she expected. The attorneys worked in hushed precision. Luis's arguments were dismantled layer by layer, his cold facade stripped away to reveal the indifference beneath. In the end, the judge dismissed the petition. Micah would stay with his mother. No further discussion needed. Tessa stepped out into the still falling rain, but this time the drops weren't chilling. They felt as though they were washing something away deep within her. The burden of fighting alone, the dread of having to prove she was worthy of love. When she returned to her apartment, Night had fallen. She switched on the kitchen light but left the radio off. The tiny room was silent. Micah was sleeping at a friend's. She had a rare few hours to herself and no clear plan for them. Then her eyes settled on a sheet of paper on the table, a pencil drawing, uneven lines yet brimming with feeling. It showed her standing beside a little girl spinning alone on a stage. No audience, no spotlights, just the two of them. Beneath it, in tiny handwritten letters, "You are the reason I could dance again." Tessa could not hold back her tears. She sank into a chair, clutching the paper as if it were something fragile. Not because of the praise, but because for the first time someone had seen her presence as an essential part of their life. The following week, Ellie, in that calm voice she used to mask her heart, said she wanted to try a new dance class. "But I'll only go if Ms. Tessa comes with me," she said, eyes cast downward. Yet her hand reached out to touch Tessa's in promise. They went to a small community center in East Austin. The dark hardwood floor, the murmur of music through the speakers, all of it imperfect. But nobody there cared about perfect timing. The children danced by feeling, each movement a shard seeking to mend. Ellie stepped into the center of the room, still wearing her pink ballet slippers with scuffed heels. But today, in the dim light, she did not hide behind anyone. She moved, unevenly, offbeat, but with one undeniable truth: she danced from her heart. Tessa sat at the back, no need for words, no cheers required, simply her presence. Graham leaned in the doorway. He neither snapped photos nor recorded video. Yet when tears welled in his eyes, he did not wipe them away quickly. Because he understood that some moments aren't meant to be captured. They're meant to be fully lived. Late summer in Austin softened in a strange way. A breeze whispered through the old oak trees on Barton Creek Hill, as if heralding the arrival of a new season. In the garden behind Graham's mansion, strands of warm yellow lights were strung across the branches, forming a gentle canopy. No stage, no spotlights, no MC. Just green grass, wooden chairs, a few worn-patterned tablecloths, and laughter floating through the air like the scent of freshly baked pastries. They didn't call it a performance, simply an afternoon of fun. But for Ellie, it felt like a beginning. She invited her 4 closest friends, wore a simple white dress, and slipped into a new pair of dance shoes. Not to replace the worn pair her mother had given her, but to carry the story forward. Micah prepared his own act. Wearing one of Graham's oversized shirts stuffed with pillows to look like an old uncle, he performed a little comedy sketch he'd invented. Everyone laughed uproariously, including Ellie, and in that moment they all realized no therapy could substitute for the pure joy of 2 children rediscovering how to trust in life. Tessa sat before an old piano set up in the garden. Its ivory keys, unused for years in a storage room, now rang out under the hands of someone who had never had formal lessons. Yet each note, however simple, pulsed with life, just like her. Unadorned, imperfect, but enough to move anyone who listened. Graham observed from the back, soft light catching his face, his gaze deep and quiet. He didn't step forward or speak until the gathering was almost over, chairs clearing and children cuddling into grown-ups in sleepy contentment. The sky was not fully dark yet, but in that thin evening light, everything felt unusually intimate, as if life had never been out of reach. Tessa was gathering up the tablecloths and paper cups scattered about when Graham approached. He was unhurried. He didn't dramatize by stooping. He simply withdrew from his coat pocket a small velvet green box, so modest that anyone distracted might mistake it for a tin of mints. She paused, surprise flickering in her eyes. But he didn't open the box immediately. There were no flowery proposals, no thunderous promises. His voice was low, just as he'd entered her life, measured, close enough to listen, patient enough to be truly seen. "I don't want you to step into my world," he said. "I want to build a new world with you." Tessa looked at him, not as one being proposed to, but as someone finally acknowledged, completely. Not for her sacrifices, not for her kindness, but for who she was. A woman who had survived, who had risen, and who still had room in her heart to love again. She nodded, not for the ring, not for the words, but for something far deeper, the feeling that she truly deserved to stay. As they stepped back into the house, Ellie was still whispering to Micah, her new dance shoes tossed on the sofa. The hem of her dress fluttered as she ran over to Tessa, breathless. "You danced to my favorite song." No one called them a family that night, but anyone who witnessed it could not deny what they had become. A family unlike any other. Not bound by blood, not sharing the same starting line, but joined by something far stronger. Kindness, time, and the choice to stay when leaving would have been the easiest path. In life, not everyone begins with a blank slate. Some hearts have been broken, some scars remain unhealed, and some children learn to be silent before they learn to trust. But the story of Ellie, Tessa, and Graham reminds us that love need not arise from perfection. It begins with presence, with a timely hug, with the patience to remain when times are hardest. Family is not always defined by blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stay when they could walk away. And sometimes the cracks in our past become the places where light can shine through. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story touched you, please leave a comment below sharing what moved you most. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder. You deserve to be loved, completely, no matter how many scars you bear.